After 4 decades of seminal reforms and opening up, China enters a new era, an era of new challenges to make China's skies bluer, pulling people out of extreme poverty and driving growth with innovation. World Insight with Tian Wei presents the 2-session special, Reform in the New Era, exclusively on CGTN.
To Reforms in the New Era, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN. Despite of its achievements, China still has many tough battles to fight. For example, making its skies blue again, eliminating extreme poverty, and pushing forward reforms through innovation. All of these easier said than done. The question is how? We could be here, sitting, articulating about the possible policies for days, months, and even years without really making an impact. So that's why we are not going to do that today. But rather, we have invited 3 pioneers from every of the fields mentioned earlier. And we're going to hear their stories and get inspired. Together with them and our honor panelists, we're also going to discuss our way forward. The first topic we want to discuss is how to make China's skies blue again. I want to invite the panelists first. Zhang Jianyu, who is the Chief Representative of Environmental Defense Fund China Program. Welcome, sir.
My pleasure.
Huang Zhengyu, a former White House fellow. Francesco Sisci, an Italian author and columnist. Last but certainly not least, Atul Aneja, who's the China correspondent of India's newspaper, The Hindu. Not only them, but also our pioneer, who has been managing to document how many blue skies China has enjoyed so far. So let's meet this pioneer through this video first.
He's one of China's leading environmental activists. Work as a journalist gave him an insight into the devastation caused by rapid growth. That led to him developing the Blue Map, an app that uses data from Chinese government to provide the public with pollution updates. He's been documenting China's air and water quality over the past decade, raising public awareness in the war on pollution. He's Ma Jun, director with the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and welcome Mr. Ma Jun, the man behind China's Blue Sky Map. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Tian Wei. Past 3.5 decades have seen tremendous economic growth in China, pulling hundreds of millions out of poverty. But the grave environmental impact, especially the smog, have aroused unprecedented concern. And the turning point came in the year 2013 when the government, in response to people's rising demand for clean air, have decided to monitor and disclose PM2.5 and then created a 5-year action plan to deal with air pollution. The Ministry of Environmental Protection requires thousands of major emitters to report to the public hour by hour their emission data for the first time in the world. We as an organization have compiled this data into a cell phone app called the Blue Map. Enable people not just to access the information, but share that through social media, filing micro-reporting against the violators. And this has led to more than 800 major iron, steel, cement, and coal power plants to openly address their violation problems. Also, this environmental data have enabled us to tap into market approach such as green supply chain and green finance. All of this contributed to significant improvement in the air quality. Taking Beijing as an example, the concentration of PM2.5 had dropped from nearly 90 micrograms to 58 last year. We all live in Beijing and we can experience more blue sky. I hope you can all enjoy that. Having said that, 70% of the cities in China including Beijing, still cannot meet with the national standards. And we are very encouraged to see the Ministry of Environmental Protection came up with a new round of action plan. Winning the battle, blue sky battle, by 2020, I believe that we need to build a long-term mechanism based on the rule of law, and also try to further tap into the market approach and enable more people to join the efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. That's a great speech. You talk about making China's skies blue again. The question is China's sky really getting bluer? Mm-hmm. I mean, you've been in the field more than a decade doing this map. So what about the result?
2013, I remember that year I mentioned that the PM 2.5 concentration is somewhat like 90. Through all these years, it has dropped to 58 in Beijing. And also, Beijing, over the past 2 months, have ranked top 10 cleanest cities in China.
Here seems to be a lot of government role in making sure Beijing's sky will be blue, because a lot of other factories around Beijing have been closed down. The question is, what about this economic sacrifice? How to make sure it's the right balance?
I think it's really a temporal issue that is a matter of the time, right? Because we all know once we get more blue skies, we get cleaner airs, everybody wins eventually. I mean, even including those people who work in the polluting industry.
But it is eventually that you just said.
Yeah, but I mean, in the short run, certainly, I mean, also you need to differentiate the situation. I think for some of the emitters, they are out of compliance already. And this crackdown is really just to force them to be in compliance. And certainly for some of the other sectors, the government is tightening up their effort, trying to really force them to improve.
Is that the right way? You're from India. I mean, emerging economies all face questions like that.
In India, the way they're tackling it, and I'm sure China is doing the same way in some ways, is change the energy mix in the sense that the focus now is on renewables to a very great extent. So the switch to electric cars is an act of faith now. By 2030, India will no longer produce cars which run on diesel and petrol. It will be all electric. So that's a very ambitious task, partly driven also by the Paris climate change, to which India is a party to.
But actually, I would like, as a journalist, to ask a question. Now, as far as I know, over 60% of energy is produced by coal. And how is going to change in the future? Is there a timetable to get to, say, to reducing coal to a certain level? Because I know that
there is a timetable. We have a lot of timetables, right?
Yeah, that's right. With the new target, it's 2030. China's coal consumption will peak. China's carbon emission will peak, basically. That before that, hopefully before that.
Yeah, I think people here talk about the energy plan, transform from the coal-based industry to more renewables. But I want to highlight the most important thing is China's government's commitment in the Paris Agreement that China's carbon emission will peak. Actually, by all accounts, I think it will peak earlier, before 2030. And that was translated to a 60 to 65% of intensity reduction based on the 2005 level. But also, I want to...
But why is that significant in a way?
Well, because China is still a developing economy. The economy is still growing. People's lifestyle will still get improved.
Yes.
And by all accounts, the conventional wisdom is that everybody's energy consumption will increase. So while you increase people's per capita energy consumption, you still want to maintain the cap, and you want to peak your carbon dioxide emission earlier. That's really a big challenge.
We do also not only have advice and suggestions and questions coming from our panelists, but also our audience as well. Do we have a question for Ma Juan?
Punishments that are used against violators. How do you convince or how do you persuade violators to abide by the law and the standards that will, guarantee a good environment around them?
You touch upon a key issue. For decades of time, the cost of violation remains to be lower than the cost of compliance. So those violators, they just choose to pay fines instead of solving their problems. And now the government has been trying to strengthen the Chinese laws and regulations and raising the cost of violations. But in the meantime, we people can also join the efforts. As I said, our app users can not just access the information of who, you can see from the Blue Map app who are breaching the standards. You can also share that through Weibo, WeChat. And more than that, our data is also now being widely used by some of the largest global and local brands in their sourcing practice. So whoever continue to breaching the standards may lose their valuable contracts. So that will also become a leverage.
Thank you so much, Ma Jun. I think we learned a lot. All the best to the blue sky map that you have over there, but certainly a lot of great efforts need to be made over the year. Thank you so much, Ma Jun.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
You're watching Reforms in the New Era, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei. I will be back after this. Welcome back. You're watching Reforms in the New Era, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei. Fighting extreme poverty. China has been doing that for decades. Now the government has a new plan to eliminate extreme poverty by the year 2020. Wow, if you look at that, it's only 2 years away. So how to do it? And how to make sure we're going to enable those in extreme poverty to walk out of it forever? We have, joining us new, Professor Fu Jun, a professor from the National School of Development at Peking University. Welcome, Professor. Meanwhile, we are once again joined by 3 other panelists. Huang Zhengyu from the United States, Francesco Sisi from Italy, last but not least, Atul Aneja coming from India. Let's meet the pioneer and listen to her story. First, this video.
Who remembers 这是在干什么？李蕊 ？Dancing. They are dancing， 对不对？对。啊，他们在干什么？在干嘛？跳舞。啊，在跳舞。
She graduated from an Ivy League school in the U.S. and then became a volunteer teacher in China. She hoped to ease poverty in her homeland through better education for the next generation.
谁可以来回答我？这么多举手，好。杨晶，你来念一下上面这句。
What do you finish class in the morning?
Wonderful.
She's Li Yuqing, an English teacher at an elementary school in one of the most remote rural areas in northwest China. She's on the front line of China's fight against poverty.
I know a lot of people are talking about poverty alleviation. Well, I think education is definitely part of the methods to do that.
So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together and welcome Li Yuqing, a volunteer teacher who believes in the value of education when it comes to fighting poverty. Yuqing, how wonderful to see you again after Gansu province.
Nice
Good
to see you again.
The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Li Yuqing, a Teach for China fellow. Currently, I am serving as an elementary school teacher in Baihe County in Gansu province. During a volunteer experience back in 2013 in a rural school back in Guizhou, I was shocked by the challenges that the rural children are facing, being separated from a very young age from their parents, who are migrant workers in the cities. So after getting my master's degree in social work in the US, I came back to China and joined Teach for China, trying to seek for a way of bridging the gap between rural and urban education. When I first came to the school, I always got phone calls from the parents. And they said to me, "We've never been to school ourselves, and we are away from home all year long. So please take care of my children." All of a sudden, I felt my responsibilities went far beyond being just a teacher. I not only have to teach Chinese and English, I also have to care for my students, both in life and emotionally. So my teammates and I have tried various ways to achieve that goal. I view quality education as a way for my students to get out of poverty in the long run. Only 5% of their parents have completed elementary schools. and all they can get is a job as construction workers in the cities with very low income. I believe my students can have a better job, a better life. But first, they need an equal opportunity in school. So in my English class, I try to view my class as a show through which my students can see and experience more. This is me making a sandwich right in front of my students when I was teaching the word sandwich. And my kids love my English class because I'm the one who have food. Also, I have a letterbox through which my students can communicate with us. They have a lot of questions about me, about college, about the outside world, and I write them back. And one time, I even sent their letters to my friends in the US, and my students were so excited to get these postcards back from abroad. Also, a lot of the volunteer teachers helped establish school libraries and bring in good books for the students and even the local citizens to read. Outside of the class, in order to better understand the community where my students live, I visited 160 families in the rural areas because I have so many students. This is what a typical house looks like in the village in Gansu. People are still using the burned coal in order to provide heating in winters. And this is one of my students. He is only in 6th grade, but he still needs to find firewood for the entire family. And that basket weighs over 20 kilograms. I remember going to a mountain village called Pangshan. One of my students, Xuelin, lives there. I remember when we went there, we found that Xuelin had been abandoned by her biological parents at a very young age, and she was adopted by a grandpa. Her grandpa held my hand so firmly, telling me that the only hope for this family is that Xuelin could finish school, find a good job. When we left Pangshan, I saw the children leaving far away, and I saw their figures disappearing into the sunset. Across the field, across the valley, I told myself, those children in the shadows, they were the future of those families. In the school where I teach, there are over 1,000 students. And those 1,000 students are the future of those thousands families. I know what I'm doing is to contribute to that future. Even though I don't know when the seeds that I plant today will grow into giant trees, but I know they will one day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is a really great story.
Thank you.
Looking at your students, do they realize that education is the way for them to be very different from the fate of their parents and their grandparents?
They might not, but the important thing is it's not about whether they realize, it's about whether we could provide them with that opportunity. And I think what we are trying to do is to let them see there are more possibilities outside of the village, outside of the mountains. And the first thing we can do is to let them fall in love with learning.
Yeah.
And once they have that passion to pursue their dreams, and I think they will find the way to a better future someday.
Compared to the resource that you have got to graduate from the Ivy League school, to be the hope of the family, and what you have been doing to be a rural teacher, which usually wouldn't require a master's degree or a doctorate degree. How do you see this question people would usually ask you?
Well, I think the volunteer experience really enriched my life as well. I don't think, I've never seen that as a waste of 2-year time. Well, I think it allowed me to see the other side of China and I know what some people in my country are going through, and I know what I can do to contribute. I have to say, I did see a lot of changes happening in my students and in the community. Before I went there would be students who hated to go to school. Sometimes they would think of dropping out of school. But through my class and the efforts of many teachers, they fell in love with school again, and I think that passion for school would be with them for a long time.
Right. Coming from our panelists, I'm sure they have some questions for you.
Well, first of all, I want to applaud you for what you're doing. I think the world needs
Why
more
don't we
people
just
like
really
you.
applaud what she has been doing?
Thank you. Thank you.
And we all know government's pivotal in helping eradicate poverty, from providing great schools and great teachers like you. But I'm very curious, what can society do? And what should we do? Either being in venture capital or in business, what can we all do?
Yuqing.
Well, personally speaking, I teach Chinese and English in my school, and we are also using very innovative apps in the schools, and we are bringing new teaching methods to the local teachers, and we actually cooperate with a lot of organizations, like teaching organizations in the urban area. And I think that's one thing that the society as a whole can do. We can offer new methods and new technology to the rural schools as well.
But those kids are poor kids. Do they have smartphones to use the app?
Not really, but the teachers can use, and we can show the kids. And we are actually doing a lot of collaborations with organizations.
Is that the way to do it?
Well, this is how I think about technology, right? Technology is going to, quote unquote, destroy and create many jobs. But in a way, education is not going to be 9 years or 12 years or even a college degree. It's going to be continuous learning. Yeah. And I think technology is the best way for people around the world, in the most remote villages, to actually learn from the best teachers around the world. So I think technology is going to be very exciting in that area, to empower us to continually to learn. Because whenever we stop to learn, I think in this world that's going to change so quickly, we're going to be no longer competitive.
Yeah. Francesco?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because I'm really moved by your stories. What can we do to convince more young people to
send your kids to that campaign? The question is that qualified?
I want to
is
send
that
my
qualified?
kids, yeah.
But here's the thing. You send your kids to the campaign, but are they qualified to be teachers? And especially after they spend half a year, they go. What about the kids?
I think passion and love and care is the most important thing to be a good teacher. Well, everybody can be trained and then become qualified as a teacher, but the first thing is that you have to get that passion.
I guess that parent is very confident about the passion. Professor Fu, will these kids coming from extreme poverty families, even after education, be able to change their fate?
There are evidence that probably they are lagging behind because of the quality of education. So there we need, it's an urgent job for China to scale up quality education in rural areas. And one of the ways of doing that is, she is doing that. Another way is to encourage other kids. And I would also propose that even for older people, it's probably a good idea for older people to go to rural areas to teach as well. Now, people have retired very early on, and they still have longevity, and it makes a lot of sense for urbanites, the retired people, to move to the rural areas to increase the quality of education in those rural areas in China.
This is where technology becomes very important, right? Today, you have these technologies and companies where you can log on to the web and actually interact with the teacher thousands of miles away. The fact is, I don't think we just need to send our people to the villages. We should bring them to us too, remotely, and technology does that. And I think one of the things the government should do is enable that type of broadband connected technology everywhere. And I think that's very doable.
While we have praising technology, but education to me is very humanistic. We shouldn't forget the human dimension of education.
Zheng Yu forgetting it, you think?
Well, hopefully technology like virtual reality can change that, right? Where you feel like even though we're not face-to-face, I feel like I'm right next to you.
It's different,
There's also
right?
a question of cultural sensitivity.
Yes.
Technology is absolutely important, but you know, each culture is differentiated. So that to get the cultural mix right is going to be a challenge as well. Education, as you mentioned, as was a part of the debate, is the key to me to eliminate poverty. And if you see in India, 82% of the males are educated and only 66% of the women are educated. So I think the key really here lies in my country is to educate our women even more than men to get the balance right. We find only 29% of the women are in the workforce. And therefore, if India has to really grow and really cut through this poverty, we have to invest in our women. And that is one very clear thing, but that problem probably is not there in China. The gender issue is probably more pronounced in my country than it is over here. But that's very education, and also based on education is skills, because while you have basic education, to become employable, you need specific skills. It may not be as sophisticated as computer science or these exotic fields, but you know, someone has to learn to be a mason, to be an electrician. The vocational training element will generate a lot of employment and help.
What you said is extremely important now too. When it comes to education, everybody has a great say and strong say, very opinionated, and we're very passionate about it. Not only us, but also our audience.
So you spoke about how a lot of these rural kids are being parented by their old and sometimes uneducated grandparents. So do you think even when these kids break through that poverty and perhaps move away from their rural backgrounds, do you think this has still left them at some sort of disadvantage? And what do you think can be done in the future to stop it from happening in the next generation?
Yes, so in the village, I not only see poverty, I see the cycle of poverty. As I've mentioned before, only less than 5% of their parents graduated from elementary school, let alone high school or college. And I think once the kids, they know actually there is more to learn beyond elementary school, and they can pursue that in the schools, I think they could find better opportunities than their parents, because all they can see now is their parents as construction workers in the urban areas and who can only come back home one time a year. That is the only kind of life they could see in the community. And I think once there's one student going out of the community, there will be more. And there will be more and more students who could find another kind of life outside there.
What we need the most are the real stories and the real case studies to convince that everybody can change their fate, even in the most extremely poor areas of China. Thank you so much, Yuqing, for being a very inspiring teacher, I guess, and also a great sister to many of your students. Thank you so much, Yuqing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please be seated. Thank you. Reforms in the New Era, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei. We'll be back after this. You're watching Reforms in the New Era, a special program of World Insight with Tian Wei. When it comes to technology and innovation, China has been showing to the rest of the world about its enthusiasm and resolve. China has this BAT, which is Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, namely tech giants, and also unicorns, many of them, as well as budding entrepreneurs. Quite a scene. But when it comes to reconstructing the economy, what can technology and innovation do? Can China provide some kinds of experiences to the rest of the world, even on that subject? I have invited a pioneer in identifying China's story and getting it told worldwide. Before we meet him, let's meet our panel once again. Joining us new, Jay Huang, who is the founding partner of J-Stone Capital and former managing director of Intel China. Welcome, sir, to our program.
Thank you.
And of course, we are joined by the other three gentlemen. Huang Zhengyu, coming from the US, Francesco Sisci from Italy, last but certainly not least, our friend from India, Atul Aneja. So together, we are going to meet this pioneer who have been trying to identify the legends coming from China when it comes to technology and innovation and tell it to the rest of the world. First, this video.
Duncan Clark, a recognized expert on China's rapidly advancing tech world, has lived and worked in the country for more than 20 years. He was a business consultant for Jack Ma in the early days of Alibaba. He's said to be one of those who knows Jack Ma best. His insider view can be seen in his book on Alibaba, a definitive work on China's e-commerce and technology giant.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Duncan Clark. Duncan. What a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us about all the stories related to Jack Ma and the secrets behind China's innovation.
Absolutely, I'll try.
Okay, floor is yours.
Thanks very much. So, many people now know Jack Ma, and I think he's, to some extent, the face of the new entrepreneurial China that we all experience living here. I had the opportunity to write this book, having met Jack Ma back in 1999 in the small apartment where he, his wife, and a few others, 16 others, had actually founded the company a few months earlier. So from this small apartment, today we have a company which is spanning the globe, in fact, in terms of offices, including in India and Italy and all the countries represented here, I think, in the audience. The story of Jack Ma is sort of the American dream made in China, if we can say. It's a story that resonates because he's not a person who came from a great university, didn't have rich parents. It's really the story that we all know, an old story of coming from rags to riches. And selling a lot of rags in the process, I think, if you buy on Taobao. Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet him. This is actually me in early 2000 with Jack Ma in a freezing Harvard Business School on the river there, in the Charles River. Jack, dresses kind of interestingly. Less these days, he's more fashionable then. But absolutely freezing. And he actually, at that very early stage, would impress people. A very small company at that point, but a huge vision. And he's, as I mentioned, a great communicator. He's a great entertainer. Actually, he's actually a stand-up comedian. If you watch Jack on YouTube or on Youku, you will see him entertaining much more than I am right now. So just don't watch me. Look at his stuff. But behind this charm is actually a deep and long-term strategy, making business easier for businesses. And initially, his business was focused on business-to-business e-commerce. But the real revolution for Alibaba came from 2003 with consumer e-commerce, when Alibaba decided to attack, at that time, eBay and other companies that were dominant in the Chinese e-commerce market for consumers. And so there's sort of an iron triangle, if you will. I mean, the Alibaba achievement is bringing together three things: e-commerce, logistics, and payment. And payment is something that, without reliable payment, you are hesitating to buy online. Similarly, delivery, if you don't get the goods when you expect them, you will hesitate. And the key point of this iron triangle that he describes is that trust is the essential element that is driving not just Alibaba, but all of the successful Chinese internet companies. Today, the logistics we see behind Alibaba's Cainiao network, and we can also talk about Jingdong, JD.com, a principal competitor to Alibaba. The experience that we have as consumers in China is actually superior to, I would argue, the US or Europe, where I'm originally from. You can, right now, if I have a headache, and maybe the audience does, we could have aspirin delivered to the studio within probably about 10, 15 minutes. Next, we have the payment experience. Earlier, Tian Wei, you said, let's connect on WeChat. I mean, WeChat is a great tool. This is not Alibaba, of course, that's Tencent. But both WeChat payments and Alipay makes everything so convenient. Just 2 days ago, I was driving out of a car park where I couldn't actually reach the vendor to pay, but it's no problem. She just held up a QR code, which I could scan from within the car at quite long distance. So the convenience of payment and transfer of money we're about to have with Chinese New Year and so on, we see convenience again, the ease of use of digital payments, much better than the traditional world. So we've seen now that banks are responding very quickly to the challenge of WeChat and Alipay. Bikes, this is somewhat more controversial because around the world now you may see bicycles that are dumped in rivers. That's sort of the joke that we see, that there's too many bikes, some of them coming from these Chinese companies. But there is a real transformation of transportation that we experience here. Beijing is a city with very large city blocks. It may take you 15 minutes, 20 minutes to get to the nearest subway station. But now with these dockless bikes, where you can hop on and hop off, using, again, the payment mechanism of WeChat or Alipay, this is making urban life easier to get around. And yes, there are too many of these bikes, and you have to trip over them to cross the road. It's still emerging, I would say. But the fact is we are seeing more people in China, including young people, getting on bikes, who previously would have thought bike is for the old, the old style of transportation. So we are seeing, I think, a public health benefit from this, although there is an environmental cost for all these excess bikes. So in these areas, we see some of the innovations that are coming, not just from Alibaba, but Tencent and other companies inspired by the stories of people like Jack Ma from Alibaba and Pony Ma from Tencent. And these are transforming people's lives and the society around us. So, thank you very much.
The guy who wrote about Alibaba and the house Jack Ma built. But you just showed us it's not just one house, but rather a whole generation of different houses. Having said that, though, Duncan, I really wonder about that photo. That's quite a scene.
I mean, there's a story behind this scene. This was an Asia Business Conference at Harvard University in January of 2000. So Alibaba was not even a year old at this point. But Jack Ma was confident enough to go on stage and actually say that he's an idiot. He said, I don't know anything. Even my investors are in the audience. At this point, Goldman Sachs had bought shares in the company. He said, they're idiots. Why would they invest in me? I don't know what I'm doing. So this is the sense of the showman. And you still see it, of course, at Davos in a very different format now. But Jack, as you know, owns the stage.
Right.
You never go on stage after Jack Ma. But behind his showmanship, we've seen at the Olympics recently as well, there is this strategy of how can he use this charm to win over investors, to win over partners, or increasingly governments overseas.
So this is the gentleman that from having nothing to now becoming an extremely inspiring example for all the others, particularly from emerging economies, about how to establish a platform and reaches to the rest of the world.
That's right. I mean, the whole vision of Alibaba is to create a platform for small businesses to reach markets.
Alibaba has been under some scrutiny, to say the least.
Yes.
Over the decade, it has been working about fakes, about credibility, about how to compare itself to the other platforms worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alibaba is evolving as a platform. As I mentioned, the B2C business, the consumer business, started with Taobao. Taobao is still a huge site. I'm sure people in the audience will use Taobao. Sometimes knowingly, people will buy fakes because the price cannot be that good, right? But the growth in the business increasingly is Tmall, which you see with the 11/11 Singles Day extravaganza, where $25 billion of goods were sold last November. Those are real goods from real vendors, and there is a lot of real goods on Taobao as well. But China is evolving too. That Chinese consumers initially, probably couldn't afford the real stuff, and now increasingly, I think it's the Westerners who come here to buy the fakes. But that's just me, maybe. But no, there is an evolution in Alibaba's model, and beyond e-commerce, we should talk about what they call new retail, getting into physical shops, but also finance, and of course, cloud computing, powering all this big data analysis, which we've heard about tonight. Even the Blue Map app that we heard about earlier, I was hearing is hosted on Ali Cloud, for example. So data is the new oil. It's the new electricity.
Duncan, you mentioned in your speech, and there's another Chinese e-commerce company, Jingdong. JD.com, the business model is more close to Amazon.
That's correct.
But however, it's in second place. Usually in internet world, and then the second player usually do not do well. So do you think Jingdong has a chance to be successful in China?
Are you representing different sides of the businesses? One is coming from JD.com, the other coming from Alibaba? No, I'm kidding.
I'm unfortunately independent. I didn't buy the shares in Alibaba at 30 cents back in 2003. So every book I sell helps me towards my $100 million mistake there. So thank you for that.
There we go.
But so JD.com is already a successful company. It's a listed company in the US. And you're right, their model is more like Amazon in that they own the goods that they sell. So they have inventory, and they're much more directly involved in logistics. It's interesting, though, that Alibaba is becoming more like JD.com, and JD.com is becoming more like Alibaba, meaning Alibaba previously said we don't really get involved in logistics, we're asset-light business, but they've been investing heavily in logistics. JD is also trying to spin off some of its heavy investments. Warehouses around China, very expensive. You know, real estate in China is extremely expensive, particularly Beijing and Shanghai. So the cost of running these massive warehouses and networks is very heavy. So JD is trying to move a little bit away from that, but Alibaba is taking them on at their own game. So it's competition is good. Brands don't want to have one platform. That would be very dangerous for brands.
You see, India's strengths have been software, whereas China's strengths has been hardware. Is there a possibility, as we move into AI and Internet of Things, that Indian software companies can write the software for AI and IoT products manufactured in China? The point I'm trying to make is where Indian software and Chinese hardware can marry.
Traditionally, India did have strengths in software versus China's strengths in hardware, let's say. But I think those lines are now blurring. It's a global game for talent now. So Chinese firms like Alibaba and Tencent have labs, and Baidu, in Seattle, in Silicon Valley, because they need to get the best talent in the world. Google has an AI lab now in Beijing, right? So this is becoming a global game. And exactly. So I think the AI is a global game, and I think the Indians are going to be playing in that. Increasingly, Indian companies are getting into hardware as well, or Chinese companies are getting into hardware in India. So I think the old divisions are blurring because of the new technology and the ease of communications.
No, what I want to ask you, also in these past 20 years, we have seen a lot of turmoil in this field. I mean, some companies which used to be huge now have disappeared. Say Yahoo,
for example.
For instance, Yahoo seemed to. Now, where do you see the real challenge and the real challenger for Jack Ma in China? Who could dethrone him and topple him?
I think
is there a possibility to be the next Yahoo?
Are you going to write a book about that too?
Yeah, my next book is called Blackjack. Actually, the biggest challenge, and I think Alibaba and other companies will tell you this, is internal. Can these companies maintain the human resources to excel in new areas? I mean, don't forget, these companies are going into vastly new areas, like Baidu into transportation, self-driving cars, Alibaba into entertainment. It's very different from an e-commerce business to entertainment. So I think the internal challenge, and can these entrepreneurs keep the teams together? Even at WeChat, a very successful product of Tencent, we've seen people leaving recently to create a potential competitor to WeChat in e-commerce. So we're seeing like keeping the team together, keeping the team on track. That's the number one thing. It isn't actually competition as much as internal.
It is the most important competition we are seeing. Internally, exactly. Zheng Yu, whether you coming from the Silicon Valley is regarding the Chinese ones as competitive worldwide, because they're doing very well here in China. But what about on a bigger stage?
Well, I think there's definitely competition and definitely cooperation as well, because we need a common global standard for a lot of these technologies. Now, in the US, however, I think companies like Amazon are very controversial, because the collective capitalization of all the retailers combined now is a fraction of what they were just a decade ago. And retailers are shedding jobs, thousands of jobs every day because of Amazon, right? The effect of Amazon, while it's creating jobs, net, it's probably not exactly positive. So do you feel like tech companies have a responsibility to all the dislocations they're causing to society at large?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Google, for example, in Washington has a massive lobbying operation. Increasingly, I mean, these big Chinese tech companies have a big presence in Beijing, but also at the city government level. Don't forget, companies like Didi, which is the Uber, if you will, of China, in fact, kicked Uber out, has had real issues dealing with local governments over displacing jobs for taxi drivers and so on. It is political when you're that big. So you're right. The other question is, well, if we try to stop these companies, what would happen? And then I think you look at history. So when the canals were dominant in the UK, for example, and the train came along, should we have protected the canals, to protect canal jobs? And we're seeing the same debate in the US today over coal miners. Can we really sustain polluting coal? So it's the same debate. Do you stop progress or do you slow it down? So I think this spirit of innovation as we move into the next generation of technology is very strong. If anything, it's pretty scary to pick the right company today in China because the competition is so intense. The capital at their disposal is great, but so are the competitors, able to access a lot of capital. So picking the winners here, a big question is whether you say BAT, can they still dominate, or should they still dominate this area? Are they going to stifle competition? They say no, and we're beginning to see some other companies emerging. That's where to watch right now. What is the next wave?
Okay, what is the next wave? Before we answer that question, it still takes us a few years, I guess.
Another book.
We want to invite back the other two speakers to join Duncan onto the stage. May I invite back Ma Jun and Li Yuqing. So we have heard your stories, whether it is about technology innovation, fighting extreme poverty through education, or making China's skies blue again. Inspiring stories. But next, what to do? We all know this year marks 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up. This is bringing China to a very different stage. What is your expectation?
I think China is a living lab for the world in new technologies. And I hope this will be applied equally in the areas of poverty reduction and environmental protection. In fact, our worlds are merging. Innovation cuts across all three.
All right, Yuqing?
I hope that we could break the cycle of poverty through education, and we can see the change in the next generation.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Yes. And Ma Jun?
I hope everyone can see that the more you care, the more you participate, the greater progress we can make in cleaning up our air and water.
Thank you so much for your stories and your input. Thank you. And with that, we're coming to the end of our special program, Reforms in the New Era, World Insight with Tian Wei. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of all my team, I want to express my great appreciation to our three pioneers and our inspiring panelists. Thank you. Together with our great audience. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. See you next time.